It started on a night when everything seemed ordinary. The kind of night where silence settled in the house like a heavy blanket, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. My name is Jack, and this story isn't one I ever thought I'd be telling. It's about me and my stepsister, Emma. She came into my life when our parents got married 5 years ago, and from the moment we met, there was something different about her. Emma was beautiful in a way that turned heads. Her confidence, the way she carried herself, it was magnetic. But she was my stepsister, and I never thought much beyond that. Or at least I tried not to. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Our parents had gone out for dinner, leaving us alone. It wasn't the first time, but something felt different. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone aimlessly, when Emma walked into the room. She was wearing a simple tank top and shorts. Nothing unusual, but the way she moved, slow, deliberate, immediately caught my attention. "Jack," she said, her voice soft yet carrying a hint of something I couldn't place. "You look bored." I glanced up from my phone. "Just passing time." "What about you?" She shrugged, walking over to the couch and sitting down a little too close. Her knee brushed against mine, and I felt a jolt of something I didn't want to name. "I'm bored too," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. There was a glint in them, something mischievous, something deliberate. I forced a laugh, trying to ignore the way my heart started to race. "Well, you could always watch TV or something." "Or something," she repeated, her voice dropping slightly. Her hand moved to the couch, resting just a little too close to mine. "You know, Jack, we've never really talked." I frowned, unsure where this was going. "What do you mean?" "We talk all the time." She shook her head, leaning in slightly. "Not like that. I mean really talked. You and I, we're not like most siblings, are we?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Well, we're not really siblings," I said, immediately regretting how it sounded. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Exactly." The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken but impossible to ignore. I tried to focus on the TV, but I could feel her eyes on me, studying me. Her hand shifted, brushing against mine, and this time she didn't pull away. "Emma," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" "What do you think I'm doing?" she replied, her tone teasing, but her eyes serious. I didn't know how to answer. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. This was wrong. I didn't know what this was. But when she leaned in closer, her face just inches from mine, all those thoughts disappeared. "Emma, we shouldn't," I started, but the words died in my throat as her lips brushed against mine, soft and tentative. My body froze, every nerve on edge, as if the world had stopped spinning. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a test. It was real, and in that moment I didn't have the strength to pull away. When it ended, the room felt impossibly quiet. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, her expression unreadable. "Say something," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I couldn't. My mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But before I could find the words, she stood up, brushing her hair back with a shaky hand. "Forget it," she said quickly, turning to leave the room. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Emma, wait," I said, standing up too fast and nearly tripping over the coffee table. She paused in the doorway, her back to me, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "I don't want to make things weird," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "But I can't pretend I don't," she trailed off, shaking her head as if to clear the thought. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emma," I said again, softer this time. She turned around slowly, her eyes searching mine. For what I know. But in that moment, everything felt different. The room, the air, the space between us, it all felt charged with something new, something I couldn't ignore. And then, without thinking, I closed the distance between us, pulling her into a kiss that was anything but tentative. It was desperate, full of all the emotions I'd been trying to deny. She melted into me, her hands tangling in my hair, and for a moment, the world outside didn't exist. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly swollen, and the look in her eyes mirrored everything I was feeling. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The next day, the weight of what had happened between Emma and me lingered in the air like a storm cloud. Every time I thought about it, my stomach tightened with a mix of guilt, confusion, and something else I didn't want to name. I avoided her for most of the morning, staying locked in my room under the guise of catching up on some work. But the truth was I couldn't face her. Not yet. When I finally ventured downstairs, the house was quiet, almost eerily so. Emma's presence had a way of filling a room, and without her there, the silence felt oppressive. I found a note on the kitchen counter in her neat handwriting. Went out for a bit. Back later. My chest tightened. Part of me was relieved I didn't have to face her yet, but another part of me, a part one wasn't ready to admit existed, felt disappointed. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the overcast sky. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all circling back to her. What did this mean for us? Could we pretend it never happened? Did I even want to? I was still lost in my thoughts when the front door opened and Emma stepped inside. She was dressed in her usual casual style, jeans and a fitted sweater, but something about her seemed different. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her hair was slightly messy from the wind. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening slightly before she recovered. "Hey," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hey," I replied, my voice betraying the nervousness I felt. She hesitated for a moment before walking past me to put her bag on the counter. I watched her every move, unable to tear my eyes away. She seemed just as unsettled as I was, her movements slightly stilted, her shoulders tense. "So," she said finally, breaking the silence, "what's the plan for today?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't really thought about it." She nodded, fiddling with the zipper on her bag. The tension between us was palpable, and I knew we couldn't keep dancing around it forever. But I didn't know how to bring it up, didn't know how to put into words everything I was feeling. "About last night," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at her, my heart pounding. "Yeah," she sighed, leaning against the counter and crossing her arms over her chest. "I don't know what to say, Jack. I don't even know what to think." "Me neither," I admitted. "But we can't just ignore it." "I know." She met my eyes, and the vulnerability in her gaze made my chest ache. I don't want things to be weird between us." "They're already weird," I said with a faint smile, trying to lighten the mood. She let out a small laugh, the tension in the room easing just slightly. "Fair point." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. Finally, she pushed off the counter and walked over to the table, sitting down across from me. Her expression was serious, but there was a softness in her eyes that made my heart skip. "I don't regret it," she said quietly. Her words hit me like a freight train. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "You don't?" She shook her head. "No. Do you?" I hesitated, the truth pressing against my lips. "No," I admitted finally. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since she walked in, she smiled. It was small, tentative, but it was enough to make the tightness in my chest ease. "So where do we go from here?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think we need to figure it out together." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Okay, together." The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of haze. We didn't talk about it again, but the unspoken understanding between us made everything feel lighter. We fell into our usual rhythm, watching TV and bickering over what to order for dinner, but underneath it all was the knowledge that something had changed. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About us. About what this meant. I didn't have the answers, but for the first time, I felt like maybe that was okay. As long as we had each other, we'd figure it out. The following days were a strange mix of normalcy and tension. Emma and I slipped back into our usual routines, but there was an unspoken connection between us now, a subtle shift that colored every interaction. It was in the way her gaze lingered a moment too long, or how my stomach flipped when our hands accidentally brushed. We didn't talk about what had happened again, but it hung in the air, unacknowledged yet undeniable. It was a Friday night when things came to a head. Our parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving the house to us. I was in the living room, sprawled on the couch and flipping through channels, when Emma walked in. She was wearing a simple black dress that clung to her figure in a way that made it hard to look away. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice coming out more strained than I'd intended. She shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not really. Just felt like dressing up." I raised an eyebrow. "For no reason?" "Do I need a reason?" She shot back, her tone teasing. I couldn't help but laugh, shaking my head. "Guess not." She walked over and sat down next to me, closer than she needed to. The scent of her perfume wrapped around me, and I had to fight to keep my focus on the TV. She leaned back, her shoulder brushing against mine, and the casual intimacy of the gesture sent a jolt through me. "What are we watching?" she asked, her voice soft. "Nothing good," I admitted, flipping through the channels aimlessly. "You can pick if you want." She took the remote from my hand, her fingers grazing mine in the process. The contact was brief but electric, and I saw her glance at me out of the corner of her eye, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She settled on some random rom-com, but I barely registered what was happening on the screen. My attention was entirely on her. As the movie played, the space between us seemed to shrink. Her leg pressed against mine, and neither of us moved away. My pulse quickened, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts I couldn't quite pin down. The tension between us was palpable, a charged current that neither of us seemed willing to break. About halfway through the movie, she shifted, turning to face me. Her expression was serious now, her eyes searching mine. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, my throat suddenly dry. She hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. "Do you ever think about us?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my mind scrambling for a response. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," she said, her voice steady but her eyes vulnerable. I can't stop thinking about that night, about what it meant, about what it could mean. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emma, don't," she said quickly, cutting me off. "Don't say it doesn't matter, or that it was a mistake. Because I know you don't believe that." She was right. I couldn't lie to her, not about this. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know what to say. It's all I've been thinking about too, but what?" she pressed, leaning closer. Her eyes were locked on mine, and the intensity of her gaze made it impossible to look away. "It's complicated," I said finally. What if this ruins everything?" "And what if it doesn't?" she countered. Her voice was soft, but there was a determination in it that made my chest ache. "What if it's worth the risk?" Before I could respond, she reached out, her hand resting lightly on mine. The touch was simple, but it sent a wave of warmth through me. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't care how complicated it is. I need to know if you feel the same way." I looked at her, my heart in my throat. The vulnerability in her eyes, the way her hand gripped mine, it was too much. I couldn't deny it any longer. "I do," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to fight it, but I can't. I feel the same way, Emma." The relief that washed over her was visible. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made my chest tighten. "Then let's stop fighting it," she said simply. And just like that, the tension between us broke. She leaned in, and I met her halfway, our lips crashing together in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and relief. It was a release of everything we'd been holding back, a surrender to the feelings we could no longer deny. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, and her lips curved into a small smile. "This changes everything," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Maybe it does," she replied, her eyes opening to meet mine. "But maybe that's okay." I didn't have an answer for her, but in that moment I didn't need one. All I knew was that for the first time in days, the tension was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that this was where we were meant to be. The weekend passed in a blur of stolen moments and whispered confessions. The walls of the house, once a silent witness to our mundane lives, now held the weight of a secret neither Emma nor I could ignore. Every glance, every touch felt charged with the gravity of what we'd become. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was a thrill, an unspoken promise that we were stepping into something that defied the ordinary. By Sunday evening, the house began to shift back to its usual rhythm. Our parents returned, their laughter and chatter filling the once quiet rooms. Emma and I fell seamlessly into our roles, pretending as though nothing had changed. But every now and then, our eyes would meet across the room, and the world would seem to slow, the connection between us as undeniable as it was forbidden. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressed down on me. What were we doing? How long could we keep this up before someone noticed? The question swirled in my mind, chasing sleep away. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I already knew who it was. Her message was short, asking if I was awake, and seconds later, I heard the soft creak of my door. Emma slipped inside, her silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of my bedside lamp. She looked beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, even in her casual clothes. She sat on the edge of my bed, her presence both comforting and overwhelming. The silence between us was heavy, charged with unspoken thoughts. She admitted she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, her words quiet but resolute. I felt the same, and though we didn't say much, the unspoken understanding was clear. When she finally fell asleep beside me, her breathing steady and soft, I stayed awake, grappling with the enormity of what we were doing. Monday morning came too quickly. The sunlight streaming through my window dragged me back to reality. Emma was gone, her side of the bed cold, but the faint scent of her perfume lingered, a bittersweet reminder of the night before. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Our parents were busy discussing their plans, and Emma and I exchanged only a few words. Yet every glance between us felt loaded, each moment threatening to unravel the fragile normalcy we clung to. The day passed in a haze, every interaction with Emma tinged with the memory of her closeness. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the mental strain of keeping our secret. Later that night, she found me in the hallway. Her expression was serious, her eyes darting around to ensure we were alone before leading me into her room. She spoke of the need for boundaries, rules to ensure we didn't get caught. The practicality of her words clashed with the ache in my chest, the thought of keeping my distance from her unbearable. We agreed on rules: no unnecessary communication, no sneaking into each other's rooms unless it was safe, no lingering touches or glances in front of others. The rules felt suffocating but necessary. The weight of our situation pressed down on us both as we silently acknowledged the risk we were taking. Yet, as we stood there in her room, the closeness between us felt like the only real thing in a world that now seemed uncertain. The days turned into weeks, and we fell into a careful rhythm. We maintained the facade of normalcy while stealing moments whenever we could. A brush of hands in the hallway, a shared smile across the dinner table, a fleeting touch in the quiet of night. These moments were small but enough to sustain us, to remind us of what we were holding on to. But the longer we kept our secret, the harder it became to ignore the cracks forming in our carefully constructed facade. The tension of living a double life, the fear of being discovered, it all began to take its toll. Each moment of closeness was tempered by the constant shadow of what would happen if we were found out. And though neither of us wanted to admit it, the question loomed over us like a dark cloud. How long could we keep this up before it all came crashing down? The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, each step more precarious than the last. Emma and I had carefully constructed a fragile facade, but every stolen glance, every accidental touch, threatened to unravel it. The rules we'd put in place to keep ourselves safe began to feel like barriers, suffocating the quiet intensity that had grown between us. By the time summer arrived, the tension had reached its peak. The days stretched long and hot, the air heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. Our parents were busy with work and social commitments, leaving Emma and me alone more often than not. The house became a pressure cooker, each moment we spent together threatening to boil over. One evening, after yet another day of avoiding each other, Emma cornered me in the kitchen. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes burned with determination. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, waiting for me to acknowledge her. "We can't keep doing this," she said finally, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "Pretending everything is fine when it's not." I leaned against the counter, the weight of her words pressing down on me. She was right. The strain of our double life was becoming unbearable. But I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fix something that felt both inevitable and impossible. "I know," I said eventually, my voice quiet. "But what choice do we have? If anyone finds out, it's not about them," she interrupted, her tone sharper now. "It's about us. About what we want. Do you even know what you want, Jack?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. What did I want? The truth was, I'd been avoiding that question for weeks, maybe even months. Admitting it felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I could come back from. But as I looked at Emma, the frustration and vulnerability in her eyes, I knew I couldn't keep running. "I want you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I've always wanted you. But wanting you doesn't change the fact that this, whatever this is, it's dangerous." She exhaled sharply, as if my admission had released something she'd been holding on to. "I know it's dangerous, but I'm tired of being scared, Jack. I'm tired of hiding. If this is real, if we're real, then we need to stop running from it." Her words hit me like a freight train. This was Emma, bold, fearless Emma, bearing her soul in a way that left me breathless. She wasn't wrong. What we had was real as anything I'd ever felt. But the risks loomed large, an ever-present shadow that threatened to consume us. The conversation ended there, not because we wanted it to, but because we didn't know how to continue. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. By the time I went to bed, my mind was a swirling storm of emotions. Fear, longing, and an overwhelming sense of inevitability. The turning point came a few weeks later. Our parents had left for a weekend trip, giving us the house to ourselves. The air felt different that day, charged with a kind of nervous energy that neither of us could ignore. We danced around each other all morning, exchanging polite words and avoiding any real conversation. But by the time evening rolled around, the tension was impossible to ignore. It started with a movie. Emma suggested we watch something to pass the time, and I agreed, desperate for a distraction. We settled onto the couch, the space between us a tangible reminder of everything we weren't saying. The movie played on, but my attention was elsewhere, drawn to the way her fingers toyed with the hem of her shirt, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emma, we need to talk." She looked at me, her expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "About what?" "About us. About what we're doing." Her gaze didn't waver, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "What about us?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. But then I thought about everything we'd been through, the countless moments that had brought us to this point, and I realized there was no going back. "I can't keep pretending that this doesn't matter," I said finally. "That you don't matter. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I don't want to face it without you." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she leaned in, her hand brushing against mine. "Then let's stop pretending," she said softly. "Let's figure it out together." And just like that, the dam broke. All the fear, all the hesitation melted away as we finally gave in to what we'd both been longing for. The night stretched on, filled with quiet confessions and tender touches, a celebration of everything we'd been too afraid to claim. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. We navigated our new reality with equal parts caution and recklessness, stealing moments whenever we could. Every secret glance, every shared smile felt like a victory, a reminder that we were in this together. But the world around us remained oblivious, a ticking time bomb that threatened to explode at any moment. The inevitable came one late summer evening. Our parents came home earlier than expected, catching us in a moment that was impossible to explain away. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Voices were raised, accusations hurled. The weight of their disappointment was crushing, a stark contrast to the joy Emma and I had found in each other. But amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. Emma stood her ground, her voice steady and unwavering as she defended us. She spoke of love, of connection, of the bond we shared that couldn't be broken by convention or expectation. Her courage was awe-inspiring, and it gave me the strength to do the same. In the end, it wasn't easy. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, from strained family dynamics to the judgment of those who didn't understand. But we faced it all together, determined to hold on to what we'd found. Over time, the anger and disappointment gave way to reluctant acceptance, and though the scars remained, they were a small price to pay for the love we shared. Looking back, I'm not sure I would have done anything differently. The path we chose was far from easy, but it was ours. Emma and I had built something beautiful out of the ashes of convention, something that defied the odds and stood strong in the face of adversity. And as I sit here now, her hand in mine, I know one thing for certain. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.